I have managed to stave off a food coma long enough to talk BYU football and basketball with you guys here on this Black Friday edition of Locked On Cougars. We're talking BYU football with hopes of going to Arlington very much on the table as they take on the Houston Cougars. Meanwhile, the BYU basketball program looks to get back into the win column today.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Do that today. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. The BYU football program in action tomorrow night. It's going to be a cold one, everybody. Mid-30s, I think, is the forecast as BYU takes on the Houston Cougars, and I am looking forward to this. Now, by the time this game kicks off, there could be little for BYU to play for relative to their chances in the postseason because at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon, you have Arizona and Arizona State squaring off in the Territorial Cup. If Arizona were to knock off Arizona State, that opens up the door for BYU. But big-time favorite in Arizona State looking to punch their own ticket to the Big 12 title game, and they would do that with a win in that one. Then at 5:30, Farmageddon, one of the great rivalry names across the country. You have Iowa State taking on Kansas State. If Iowa State can hold serve in Ames at home against Kansas State, they likewise will punch their ticket to the Big 12 title game and ace out BYU or any other Big 12 team hoping to get to Arlington next week. If you're a Cougar fan, it's as simple as you watch those two games and hope that one or two of those teams go down, thereby allowing BYU, and if both teams lose, Colorado, should both BYU and Colorado win, play in Arlington next week. It doesn't get much more difficult than that, but the bigger point to be made here is BYU has got to handle their business at home. This is a program, might I remind you, is on a 2-game slide right now. They cannot afford to have a 3-game slide. What's it going to take for BYU to beat Houston? Well, simply put, you've got to overcome a pretty stingy Houston at defense and ensure you don't have the same type of game that you had against Kansas. I look at the Houston Cougars and the way that they play football. They're 4-7, so they're not playing for bowl eligibility. They're simply playing spoiler if they can afford to do so in this game. And if BYU can go and handle their business against Houston, they will be in a good spot. But remember, Kansas came to town just a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of us, George truly included, thought that Kansas was a team that was okay. They've got a little bit of a hot streak here. Let's see what they really can do. And they shut down BYU. Now, the Cougars also shut them down themselves a little bit because they made 4 trips inside the red zone and came away with a measly 6 points out of those trips. Awful interception in the end zone on a fade route from Jake Retzloff. Just 4th and 11 that you couldn't convert. BYU did essentially everything wrong that you could do in that game against Kansas to make it a mess for themselves, and they paid the price by losing that game. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot have that happen in this game against the Houston Cougars. Houston is absolutely putrid scoring-wise on offense. They average 13.6, count them, 13.6 points per game on average this season. Their scoring, their offense, it is a mess, but their defense has kept them in games. So what might I remind you, what you saw a couple of weeks ago against Kansas, that is what Houston is banking on BYU doing in this game. You got to go out and do your thing if you're the Cougars. Go out there, punch them in the mouth, and end this one early. If you allow Houston to hang around in this game, you are playing with fire. BYU has the last couple of games, let's be honest, really, really slow starts. And you can chalk that up to player execution, coaching errors, motivation, whatever thing you want to chalk it up to, it doesn't matter. That's all got to go out the window at this point. And the BYU football program, every person involved with it, whether it's a coach or player or administrator, anybody who has an impact on the on-field product for tomorrow night's game, the whole focus in my mind is you got to go out and you got to punch Houston in the mouth early and end this one early. If you allow Houston to hang around and to have those doubts creep into your mind after losing 2 back-to-back games against Kansas and against Arizona State, and those doubts start to creep back into the mind of these players, that is a recipe for disaster because you could have the door open to you to play in the Big 12 title game. But if BYU doesn't beat Houston, it doesn't matter. You're out anyways. There is some control here for BYU simply by handling their business and beating the Houston Cougars, and also the fact that they should know, at least with a decent opportunity, of what they're playing for. If BYU were to lose in this game, then you're probably looking at going to the Alamo Bowl. And you're probably looking at a chance maybe you rematch against Colorado in that game, because some of you may realize this, some of you may not. The bowl contracts still tie a lot of the former Pac-12 teams to bowls that the Pac-12 had contracts with, one of which was the Alamo Bowl. The Alamo Bowl traditionally was the bowl game that both the Big 12 runner-up and the Pac-12 runner-up played in. Well, let's say Colorado and BYU are the runners-up behind Iowa State and Arizona State. Well, you can very well see them playing on December 28th down there in the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas. But nobody, yours truly included, wants to see that happen. We want to see BYU a week from tomorrow playing in Arlington, Texas, playing for Big 12 supremacy and having a chance to punch their ticket to the college football playoff. So I just look at this, and it comes down really simply for me is BYU has to go out there and bury the Cougars early. I would love to see BYU, even if they win the coin toss, say, we're taking the ball. Get the ball, go right down the field, score a touchdown, and essentially plant your flag and say, this is how it's going to be. That's what I'd like to see from this BYU team. I think it would answer a lot of questions about the fact that they're, quote, not motivated. B, they have coaching mistake. You can, like I said, you can throw up any of the arguments that have been made about this BYU team. But I want to see this team get to 10 wins. I'd love to see them finish the regular season 10-2, because the other thing about this is consider where BYU was when the season kicked off and to consider where they could be at the end of tomorrow night, sitting at with double-digit wins. That's a remarkable thing. A lot of us out there, I'll include myself, thought this was a year that BYU was going to struggle through. They're going to have to fight, scratch, and claw just to find their way to 6 wins. It's been absolutely remarkable to watch what BYU has done. And I understand the angst around BYU, because when you start 9-0, the whole expectation level, it completely changes. And I completely understand that. But to consider where we were just 3 months and change ago in training camp, talking about, all right, let's do the math. Where does BYU find 6 wins? Where will they go bowling if they get to 6 wins this season? And now to be looking at it saying, yeah, they could finish the regular season with double-digit wins and potentially a Big 12 title game, a college football playoff berth, all that's still on the line. It's been absolutely remarkable. But you have to, if you're a member of the BYU football program, realize that all that goes away if you go out and lay a big fat egg against the Houston Cougars. That cannot happen. And that's got to be the mindset in this game, is go out, punch them in the mouth, shut it down early. Essentially, speaking of Houston, do not allow them to get any type of confidence, and make sure they remember that it's cold and it's miserable to play at LaVell Edwards Stadium. That's what the message should be to the Houston Cougars as we see the Cougars take on their fellow Cougars inside LES tomorrow night. Now, BYU basketball, they learned a hard lesson yesterday in the Rady Children's Invitational, playing against the Ole Miss Rebels. They lost that game, but they did not lose, I think, a lot. And I'll try and explain what I mean by that, and we'll do that next, right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to the events you want to go to, whether it's a sporting event like BYU basketball today. If you haven't been in the San Diego area, get over to UC San Diego and watch BYU play. But if you want to do anything else, whether it's a concert, theater event, your favorite comedians coming to town, the best part about Game Time's got all those tickets for you guys, and have a brand new feature inside their app called the Game Time Picks Game Time Picks feature, which makes getting your tickets to the event you want to see even easier. It filters out all the fluff. There's only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to search through thousands of tickets, wasting your time trying to find the right options for you guys. They also have an incredible ability to make sure you're covered in any way, shape, or form. They have lowest price guarantees, events cancellation protection, even job loss protection. You lose your gig, they will take care of you guys and help you out in that circumstance. So the best part is you can take a guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with our friends over at Game Time with the Game Time Picks feature in the app. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Hope you guys are on a fantastic Black Friday. Whenever you guys see this, hope you guys got some great deals. Like me, you're trying to stave off a food coma after eating a lot of food yesterday, but nonetheless, thank you for all your patronage and your support as always. All right, the BYU basketball program lost their first game of the year, losing to the Ole Miss Rebels 96-85 in overtime in their opening game of the Rady Children's Invitational. And watching this game, it was an interesting one because remember, BYU was up 4 with just, I don't remember how many seconds to go. And I felt like, all right, close this out. But they were unable to do so. And it kind of mirrored kind of this game because these two teams, speaking of Ole Miss and BYU, kind of went back and forth on different runs against each other. And I will also say this, the runs were aided by the fact that it was over officiated. I don't remember how many fouls ended up being. I didn't really tweet out about this game because the cabin we were at with my parents, let's just put it, the Wi-Fi was awful. Let's see. We got personal fouls. Oh my gosh. 50? Oh, that's what it ended up being. 50. Okay. Most of you know that I have a bone to pick with college basketball officiating. 50 fouls. When you have more than one foul per minute in a basketball game, that is malpractice on the official's part. I don't care how rough and tumble it may have been. I didn't really consider it to be all that rough and tumble, but you know what? 50 fouls, absolutely ridiculous. I know that the free throws were ridiculous too. Let's see. Oh, we got, 62 free throws. Okay. All right. Well, nonetheless, it was a back and forth affair in this game. And the nice part was BYU showed they had fight. And simply, it felt like they ran out of gas down the stretch. In that overtime period, remember, Ole Miss, I think it was, I don't know how many free throws they had in that overtime period, but they had a bunch, and they made every single one of them. BYU, I felt like this is a young team that learned a hard lesson, is that when you go into overtime games like this, you got to maintain that edge and be able to continue to score, and that's where BYU faltered, simply. It was just in the overtime period. There were a lot of good performances, I felt like, for BYU in this game. You look at what happened is BYU's still got that peel and switch defense. It's not mastered yet, and it still continues to have some issues. I feel like I don't think it's going to be a forever issue this season, but it's still, when you give up 96 points, you kind of got to point to that and say that's not good enough for BYU. But the thing about the Cougars is they are going to have to learn how to obviously kill off a game, because when you're up 4, with just a little bit of time left, was it? I don't know. It was like minute 12, maybe, I think, to go. So it wasn't very long, but your inability to prevent Ole Miss from tying that game off, that's disappointing. The other thing about this is BYU now has a chance to bounce back, but they're going to have to do it against NC State. Now, Purdue and Ole Miss are the two ranked teams in this invitational, but BYU, remember last year, they had a pretty stiff challenge from the NC State Wolfpack, and it got pretty heated down the stretch. Then their head coach, if I recall correctly, from NC State get booted from that game. It was a crazy, crazy scene. But BYU, it's another opportunity to get back into the win column and hopefully show that they can have a better fight in this game. A lot of this from BYU, it felt like, was that offensively, I'm not having many concerns. The Cougars are routinely able to put up 80-plus points in a game. The concern is, what are you going to do defensively? And Ole Miss, that's a Big 12 caliber squad. Speaking of just the overall talent base and what they're capable of doing. And that's what BYU can expect to face literally every single game when they get into Big 12 play. Keba Keita was back. Didn't offer a ton. It didn't feel like just 18 minutes. I think he's on a little bit of a minutes restriction. He had 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 0 points. A disappointing showing for Dawson Baker once again. Was he 0 for? Yeah, he was 0 for in this game. 0-2 from the field in just 10 minutes. Dawson has got more talent, it feels like, than what he is showing at different points this year. And I'm hoping that he's able to step up against bigger opponents, because I'm telling you, if he wants to stay in this rotation and he wants to be a part of this team, you can't go 0 for in a game like this. It won't fly. Jaeger Demon, I thought he had an okay performance, 16 points, second highest on the team. They had 5 guys, speaking of BYU, in double digits. You had Foose with... do we call it a double baptism? The dunk that he had in that game. It's an impressive play to go up over one guy in particular and then come down on another guy essentially and jam all over him. Way to go, Foose. But he continues to show that he is a very effective player in his role. 16 points, 6 rebounds off the bench, 3 assists, more importantly. The nice part is see Keba Keita and Foose, they're 2 big men in the middle for BYU, getting 3 assists. That means that they're understanding that maybe, hey, I don't have to go up over somebody every single time to score. I can dish it out and let some of these shooters do their thing. Cannon Catchings led BYU in scoring, 5 of 10 from 3, 6 of 14 overall with 17 points. Continues to show that he's got a very natural stroke and ability to shoot the basketball. But I look at this BYU basketball loss, and it screams to me that, yes, BYU is just fine offensively this season. There's just zero issues of the fact that they're going to have guys who can score the basketball. That's not a problem. They got to be able to lock down opposing teams. And yes, we have a parade to the free throw line. Once again, I just looked it up as I was talking here. It was 13 free throw attempts in the overtime period alone for Ole Miss. Okay, that's one thing is the officiating, and I'm talking for both sides. You can't have 50 fouls. 29 for BYU, 21 for Ole Miss. A little bit of foul disparity there, and obviously there's going to be some grumbling about that, but I just can't stand the fact that you have nearly more than a foul a minute in this game, and it just causes for a little bit of a disjointed feeling to a contest like that. But hopefully BYU can get better defensively, because that's really where I really feel like BYU's lacking right now. Remember, looking back at that UC Riverside game where BYU had to fight tooth and nail down the stretches, UC Riverside caught fire from 3. I don't worry about BYU on the offensive side of the football. I am worried. I'm actually very worried about their defense. Is this peel and switch? Is it really going to take? And is it going to take soon? Because I don't want to be talking about in mid-February that BYU scores 90 points because of 95 in another Big 12 loss. That's not what I want to talk about when it comes to BYU basketball. I'd like to talk about a team that, maybe they grind their way to 76 points, but they only gave up 70 and they win the game that way. I'd like to see the defense finally come alive. And I think they have the athletes to get this defense done. It's more about, I think, fully understanding it and more playing versus thinking. Because I've seen a number of the games for BYU, obviously in person this year. And at times it feels like when there's a defensive a set for BYU called out, you can kind of tell the guys are kind of still like, okay, what are my assignments here? That's going to take some time, I think, for it to become second nature for the Cougars on defense. And I think given time, they can get better at it, but it needs to get better quickly. It can't be, you just can't let it linger. Because if you continue to kind of screw around with this and get into Big 12 play and say, we'll figure it out then, that's too late. The non-conference slate is here for BYU to get it right now. And obviously a big matchup against NC State in this game. Looking forward to that because once again, it's a chance for BYU to bounce back. A lot of players and coaches will tell you, you want to get right back on the court and have a chance to get right back after it. And well, today's one of those days to do that. And then you got to travel across the country next week to take on Providence in Rhode Island. So I said that this 3-game stretch was going to really, I think, test what BYU's capable of. Well, I think this loss to Ole Miss showed that the defense still lacking. Can they show better against NC State and show that, hey, we can take steps defensively? That's a big question mark right now. So I'm looking to see what BYU does as they try and bounce back here against the Wolfpack today. And if you're looking to watch that, by the way, it is a 1:30 tip-off Mountain Time. That's 12:30 for those of you down there in California to watch it, 3:30 on the East Coast. And it should be a great opportunity for the Cougars. I look forward to this. I think BYU has got a lot of talent, a lot of just overall depth. And the other thing about it is the depth alone, along with the talent, should yield better defensive sets for BYU. But right now, it isn't. So I just want to see more, buy-in from this team. And so long as they do that, I think this is a team that is going to be capable of hanging around. But they got to, like I said, they have a lot to prove in this matchup against NC State, because I don't want to see them go 0-2 in this tournament and show that they just cannot defend as a team right now. I refuse to believe that they don't have the horses to get it done on defense. I'm not worried about the offense. I want to see them prove they can do something on defense, and I think that's priority number one for me. It's what I'm going to be watching in this game today as they take on NC State. All right. Enough talking BYU hoops. We will finish up today's show with my prediction for tomorrow night's football game. We'll also get into some other notes about BYU sports that I haven't had a chance to touch on quite yet this week, because there's some things that have been happening out there on this Thanksgiving week, and we'll delve into all of that as we continue on right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, many of you probably were like me. Along with the BYU basketball game yesterday, they were consuming copious amounts of NFL football. Best part is with the NFL action, you can tackle it all with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. It's as simple as that. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. All you got to do is get the hunch in the middle of a game. You can check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today to have some fun along the way. You'll get started once again with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's as simple as that. So that's FanDuel.com to get started today. And it's never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. All right. Black Friday edition. It's probably going to be a little bit shorter here, but it's been Thanksgiving. And I've had a couple of you ask me, like, Jake, how are things going with the podcast? And I told you guys I would get an answer for you. And I figured, you know what? Let's just do it today. So biggest thing is that we are seeing massive success. And yes, when you say massive success combined with a football team that went 9-0 at one point, yeah, that's going to happen. I can tell you that Cougar fans in droves were consuming our content. And yes, the 2 losses have backed that off a little bit. But I can tell you this is officially year 7 of the podcast. Crazy thing, I've been doing it this long. But I have had an absolutely incredible fall. I'm speaking just from the podcast side of things. And by the way, thank you to all of you who continue to support the podcast. I found out literally yesterday from a family member of mine that people that I don't even would ever imagine watch this podcast, watch it all the time. They're everydayers. And it's astounding to me how many people consume it. So thank you first off to all of you who watch it truthfully or listen to it or however you consume the podcast. It means the world to me. But I can tell you this much. This podcast is in the strongest spot as it's ever been. We started from literally nothing 6-ish years ago, in this very same basement, by the way. I've lived in the same house the entire time we've been doing this podcast. So you had the video element almost 2 years ago, if I recall correctly now, on YouTube. But everything that's been going on with this podcast, it's awesome to see. We have got record amount of views on YouTube, record amount of downloads on the various podcast platforms out there, mainly Apple and Spotify. Those are the 2 biggest, but I know a bevy of you listen on other podcast apps, Amazon Music, where you can listen to this ad-free, by the way. Some of you get annoyed by the ads. All you got to do is download the Amazon Music app. If you have a Prime membership, it's ad-free. I literally post an ad-free version every single day. But regardless, we have seen record amounts of downloads across all platforms, demographics, everything. So thank you, truthfully. And I'm grateful because it's a time of gratitude and thankfulness that you guys enjoy this podcast as much as you do. I failed to comprehend at times how wide a reach this podcast truly can have. I got guys like Glenn, who is over. Glenn, I think you're still in the Philippines watching this. I know JT Lamoureux. If you're checking this out today, you're over there in Japan. You were actually just in my what I consider my second homeland of Taiwan, visiting a couple of days ago or last week, I guess. You guys take this podcast everywhere. I know I've got guys like Mojo, who's a fighter pilot for the United States Air Force. Like, we got people everywhere. And that's kind of the far-flung group. Tyler Bergen out there on the East Coast. There are so many of you that I literally, through this podcast, would have never met. Truthfully, I would never met Mojo, Tyler, Glenn. And I haven't met a lot of you guys even in person. But there are thousands upon thousands of you in Provo and here around my where I live in Saratoga Springs that consume this podcast on a daily basis. I've got people in my very ward, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, my ward, like our congregation, who watch this all the time. It's absolutely incredible to watch what this podcast has done, and it's surpassed literally every expectation I had for it. Maybe David Locke and the Locked On Podcast Network had a vision for what this could become. I never thought it would get to this level. So the update for you guys is we are in a fantastic spot. And it's all, truthfully, thanks to you people out there, because I just do my thing. I talk into a mic, look into a camera, and that's what I do every evening for the most part, 200 and whatever days a year that I do this podcast. So from the bottom of my heart, speaking on behalf of my family, etc., thank you. Truthfully, thank you for the support of the podcast. It does not get to the level it's at. And by the way, we ain't stopping anytime soon. It's kind of maybe sounds like, hey, is Jake said, no, I'm not stepping aside anytime soon. I truthfully love doing what I do with this podcast. And once again, it doesn't happen without y'all's patronage. So cannot thank you guys enough for continuing to support the podcast. Without you guys, it doesn't do what it does, because if I'm just talking into a mic and looking at a camera and nobody reacts to it, it doesn't get the traction that it has. So without you guys, we'd be lost and wouldn't be doing this thing. So thank you for that. And thank you to the BYU athletic department. Truthfully, they are an incredible thing. We just saw BYU men's soccer, which is a club team. They won their 5th straight national championship. Big shout out to BYU men's soccer. I still believe that should be a Division I sport at BYU, but for the time being, it's not going to be that. We just saw cross country men's and women's sweep the national championships. Yes, we talk an inordinate amount of BYU football and basketball on this podcast, because those are the real movers and shakers, as it were, when it comes to what people want to consume around BYU sports. But let's not forget that there are a lot of other athletes out there in the BYU athletic department and the BYU sports universe that are doing incredible things. Like I said, we had 3 national championships won in the past week here in Provo, and I think I haven't done a very good job about publicizing. I think others maybe have, but it still should be celebrated. 2 cross-country championships, a men's soccer championship. We got BYU women's volleyball, who's been through an up-and-down season. They're going to have the NCAA tournament before too long. The women's soccer team, even though it was a rebuilding year for Jennifer Rockwood's squad, they still made the NCAA tournament. We are seeing a really well-rounded BYU athletic department, and it allows me to have plenty to talk about on this podcast. And like I said, I spend 90% of my time talking football and basketball, and for good reason, because those, like I said, are the real power players. But we should still celebrate the fact that BYU athletics is doing its thing. So thank you for all your support. My prediction for tomorrow, it's this. I've got BYU 31. Let's see. 31, BYU 31, Houston 14. How about that? I think it's a very thorough beat down for BYU. And if I'm wrong, well, that's bad news for BYU football. So all the same, thank you for everything you guys have done to support this podcast. Thank you for continuing to support us. And I'll also add this. I think BYU basketball also gets back into the win column today. I'm not really good at basketball scores. I'll just say BYU 80, NC State 71. Good enough. All right. So there goes my predictions. But once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Really, it's been a phenomenal year, and we ain't stopping anytime soon. And hopefully we're talking about a BYU team that's headed to Arlington next week. And we're doing that coming up on our postcast edition of the podcast late tomorrow night, Sunday, that type of stuff. So nonetheless, thank you for everything you guys have done to support this venture. And as always, thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.